warmth of home wrapping around Dmitri as he sat in his office. Papers were strewn across his desk, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in the fatigue of a long day. That's when he heard a low murmur, the sound of his wife Larisa talking in the next room. His ears tuned in unconsciously, barely interested until a few words slipped through the quiet. "Andrei, of course it'll work. Dmitri has no idea what's coming. Once I accuse him of violence, everything will be in my name. The house, the money, it'll be ours." Dmitri's heart froze, his breath caught in his chest. He strained to hear more, and her voice continued, smooth and confident. "I'm tired of playing the perfect wife. Once this divorce is through, we'll have everything we need, and Dmitri will be left with nothing. He's always been a fool." For a long moment, Dmitri sat there, unmoving. His world had just been torn apart, yet his body felt eerily calm. There was no explosion of rage, no immediate reaction, just a slow, cold realization that the woman he had loved and cared for all these years was planning to betray him in the most calculating way imaginable. Worse, she intended to paint him as the villain, to turn their entire life into a weapon against him. As he could hear her giggle now, probably at something Andrei had said on the other end of the line. Dmitri knew exactly who that man was. Larisa's colleague or lover, the man she planned to build a new life with. A life funded by his hard-earned money, no less. There was no time to feel hurt, no room for Harchesh. His brain was already working, assessing the situation with a cold, sharp clarity. Larisa hadn't heard him. She still thought she had the upper hand. He would let her believe that. He would act fast but carefully. Without making a sound, Dmitri stood up, quietly closing the door behind him. It was like moving through a dream, every step deliberate. He walked to the bedroom, grabbed a suitcase, and began packing. He wouldn't confront her, not now, not ever. Larisa didn't deserve that satisfaction. She had made her choice. Now he would make his. In silence, Dmitri packed essentials, his mind methodically working through the steps. He'd cancel the joint accounts, freeze any access to his business finances, stop all automatic payments, and transfer his savings to a separate account. She would be left with nothing. He wasn't going to give her the chance to destroy him. No, Dmitri was going to leave Larisa, just as she had planned to leave him cold, broke, and blindsided. But before she even realized he was gone, Dmitri would be far away, and by the time the dust settled, she would be the one left without a future. She thought she had him trapped, thought she could play him. But Larisa had underestimated him. As he zipped up the suitcase, Dmitri glanced toward the door. Her voice was still floating through the house, sweet and venomous. He allowed himself a final moment of quiet, then, without a sound, he left. There would be no confrontation, no messy arguments, no pleas for explanations. Dmitri was done, and by tomorrow morning so would she be. As Dmitri quietly slipped out of the bedroom, he felt the weight of what he was about to do. The house was still the same house where they had built their life together, the same walls that had once felt warm and filled with laughter. But now everything seemed cold and hollow, a reflection of the betrayal that had just shattered his world. He walked down the hallway, careful not to make a sound. Larisa was still on the phone, her voice a mixture of sweetness and scheming. He could hear her pacing the living room as she continued talking to Andrei, no doubt basking in the triumph of her plan. "Once I accuse him, it'll be over. Dmitri's reputation will be ruined, and no one will ever believe him. Everyone will think he's some abusive Basamanther, and the courts will side with me. They always do. After that, it's just a matter of time before we can live the life we want." Dmitri's stomach turned, but he swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He had always known Larisa was manipulative, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. She had already cast him in the role of a villain, preparing to use every ounce of their history, every piece of his trust to destroy him. But what Larisa didn't know was that Dmitri wasn't a man who crumbled easily. He had built everything from the ground up, worked hard for every bit of success they now enjoyed. He wasn't going to let her steal his life away and walk off into the sunset with another man, using lies and deceit to tear him apart. Dmitri reached his office again, his heart pounding now, not with fear, but with cold anger. He sat at his desk and pulled up his bank accounts, eyes narrowing as he began shutting off access to everything. The joint account, the one Larisa probably assumed would be her lifeline, once the divorce papers were filed, was drained and transferred to a new private account. He froze their credit cards, canceled the automatic payments on her car and the mortgage. She would wake up to find that her safety net was gone, and by the time she realized it, Dmitri would be far away, with a head start she wouldn't see coming. He moved quickly, his fingers flying across the keyboard, closing accounts, changing passwords, and cutting off any financial ties that could be used against him. Larissa had no idea what was happening, still laughing softly into the phone as she spoke to her lover. She probably imagined herself already living in their home, with Andrei beside her and Dmitri out of the picture, ruined by her false accusations. But Dmitri wasn't going to play the part she'd written for him. Once the financials were locked down, he gathered the rest of his belongings. Not much, just enough for a few days. He had time to regroup later, but right now his priority was getting out of the house before Larissa suspected anything. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of knowing he had hurt her. He wouldn't confront her, wouldn't give her a chance to twist her stays any further. As Dmitri quietly zipped up his bag, he took one last look around the house. This place had once been his sanctuary, a symbol of the life he had worked so hard to build. But now it felt like a stranger's home, poisoned by deceit and betrayal. He didn't feel any sadness, just a steely resolve. With his suitcase in hand, Dmitri headed toward the door, listening as Larissa's voice floated through the house one last time. He slipped out into the night, the weight of the betrayal heavy, but the clarity of his next step stronger than ever. The night air was cool as Dmitri stepped outside, the silence of the neighborhood in stark contrast to the turmoil swirling inside him. He walked to his car, the keys jangling quietly in his hand as he approached the driver's side door. As he opened it, he took a deep breath, glancing back at the house one last time. The lights were still on in the living room, where Larissa continued her conversation with Andrei, oblivious to the fact that everything was about to crumble around her. Dmitri slid into the driver's seat, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just transpired. Larissa, the woman he had loved for years, had not only been unfaithful, but had also crafted a plan to destroy him entirely. She would have accused him of domestic violence, manipulated the system, and taken everything from him: his money, his reputation, and perhaps even his freedom. As he gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white as the weight of it all settled on him. But despite the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior, Dmitri was not a man who acted on impulse. His movements were deliberate, calculated, just as they had been inside the house. He didn't rush off in a blind rage, didn't drive to some unknown destination. No, Dmitri had always been a man with a plan, and tonight was no different. He knew exactly where he needed to go. And he started the engine, the car humming to life in the quiet night. Without looking back again, Dmitri pulled out of the driveway and into the street, his mind already mapping out his next moves. Larissa thought she had trapped him, thought she had outsmarted him, but she had no idea that Dmitri had already turned the tables. By the time she realized what was happening, she would be powerless to stop him. As he drove through the city streets, his thoughts drifted to his children. They were his priority now. Dmitri had no doubt that Larissa would use them in her twisted game, attempting to gain full custody by painting him as an unfit father. She would lie, cry, and manipulate the courts, all to make herself look like the victim. But Dmitri had something she didn't evidence. He had overheard everything, and now he had a chance to protect himself and his children from her lies. He had already started the process by cutting off her access to the money. Tomorrow he would meet with his lawyer, present everything he had heard, and begin preparing for the battle ahead. Dmitri wasn't just going to defend himself, he was going to make sure Larissa paid for what she had done. She wouldn't get away with trying to ruin his life. As the car sped down the dark road, Dmitri's mind was sharp, focused. He had no room for fear or sadness now, only determination. His world had been torn apart in the span of a single evening, but he wouldn't let that define him. He would rebuild stronger and smarter than before, and Larissa would be left to pick up the pieces of the life she had shattered. After a while, Dmitri pulled into the parking lot of a small hotel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, just a temporary place for him to stay while he figured out the next steps. He knew he needed a clear head for the fight that was coming, and staying away from the house would give him the space he needed. Dmitri checked in, paid in cash, and made his way to the room, the weight of everything beginning to settle on his shoulders. Once inside, he set his suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall for a long moment. It was quiet here, peaceful in a way his home hadn't been for a long time. Dmitri let out a slow breath, allowing himself just a second of stillness before pulling out his phone. It was time to prepare for war, and he wasn't going to lose. Dmitri sat in the dimly lit hotel room, the silence pressing in on him as he stared at the phone in his hand. His mind was racing, but his hands were steady as he dialed the first number. His lawyer, Ivan Sokolov. answered on the second ring, his voice groggy from the late hour. "Dmitri, what's going on?" Ivan asked, concern immediately replacing his sleepiness. "Ivan, I need to meet with you tomorrow morning first thing," Dmitri said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about Larissa. I overheard her making plans to divorce me, accuse me of violence, and take everything." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a sharp intake of breath. "Jesus, Dmitri, are you sure?" "I'm sure. I heard her talking on the phone to her lover. She's been planning this for a while, it seems. She's going to accuse me of domestic violence to secure the divorce, the house, the money, everything." Dmitri's voice remained level, but his words were laced with a cold fury. "All right," Ivan replied, fully awake now. "We need to act fast. I'll prepare the paperwork for an emergency protective order, and we'll get the financials locked down on your end. You already cut off the joint accounts. Everything's been transferred to my private accounts. She won't be able to access anything. I left the house tonight, packed a few things. She doesn't know I heard her." Dmitri's tone was resolute. He wasn't just reacting, he was planning, controlling the situation from every angle. "Good, that's smart. We'll also start building a case for custody. If she's willing to make false accusations, she's capable of a lot worse. We need to document everything, your actions, her words, any interactions from now on. Keep your cool, Dmitri. This is going to get ugly, but we can beat her at her own game," Ivan said, his voice confident but serious. Dmitri nodded, even though Ivan couldn't see him. "I'm prepared. I just need to protect my children. Larissa will try to use them against me, I know it. We'll get ahead of her on that. Courts don't look kindly on parents who make false accusations. If we can prove her intentions, it'll work in your favor for custody," Ivan assured him. "Come by the office at 8 a.m., and we'll get everything in motion." "Thanks, Ivan," Dmitri said, his voice softening for a moment. "I appreciate this. Hang in there, Dmitri. We'll handle this." After hanging up, Dmitri sat back, his mind racing with everything that lay ahead. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. Larissa was ruthless. And once she realized her plan had failed, she would fight back even harder. But Dmitri had the advantage now. He wasn't blindsided, and he wasn't going to let her destroy his life without a fight. He opened his laptop, logging into his accounts once more to double-check that everything was secure. There was no room for error. He needed to be absolutely certain that Larissa had no financial leverage over him. As he reviewed the numbers, his thoughts wandered to his children. He couldn't let them become pawns in this twisted game. Larissa didn't care about their well-being, she only cared about winning. Dmitri clicked out of his accounts and shut the laptop, standing up to stretch. The room was small and bare, the bed stiff and uncomfortable, but it didn't matter. He wasn't here for comfort, he was here to survive. To regroup, he would get through this, one step at a time, and when the dust settled, Larissa would realize that she had severely underestimated him. With that thought in mind, Dmitri lay down on the bed, closing his eyes. Tomorrow would be the beginning of the real battle, but for now he allowed himself a moment of rest, knowing that he would need all his strength for the storm ahead. Dmitri woke up before dawn, the darkness of the early morning matching the somber mood settling in his chest. His body was tense, the events of the previous night replaying over and over in his mind. Larissa's voice, full of cold calculation, echoed through his thoughts. He shook his head, trying to shake the lingering anger, but it clung to him like a shadow. The hotel room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on him as the weight of what was to come bore down. He swung his legs out of bed and sat for a moment, his hands resting on his knees, staring at the floor. The fight ahead was going to be brutal, he knew it, but there was no time for hesitation. By the time the first rays of light began filtering through the curtains, Dmitri was already dressed. His mind steeled for the day ahead. He grabbed his phone and dialed another number, this time for his accountant, a man who had managed his finances for years and knew the ins and outs of Dmitri's business empire. "Sergey, it's Dmitri. I need you to review all the transactions on the accounts we froze last night," Dmitri said, his voice sharp and to the point. "Larissa's going to try something. I want to make sure she can't slip through any cracks." "I'm on it," Sergey replied, his tone just as serious. "I'll comb through everything and flag anything suspicious. Don't worry, she won't get her hands on a ruble." Dmitri thanked him and hung up, glancing at the clock. It was still early, but he was ready to face the next phase of his plan. Ivan, his lawyer, was expecting him at 8 a.m., and Dmitri intended to arrive early. He grabbed his briefcase, slipped his phone into his pocket, and left the hotel room, heading into the crisp morning air. As he drove through the city streets, the familiar buildings and bustling traffic felt surreal. It was as if the world was moving on, oblivious to the storm brewing in his life. Dmitri gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw set as he turned onto the street leading to Ivan's office. When he arrived, Ivan was already waiting, seated behind his large wooden desk, stacks of paperwork spread out in front of him. The moment Dmitri walked in, Ivan stood up, extending a hand in greeting. "Meet Dmitri, I've been reviewing everything we discussed last night. We have a lot to go through." Dmitri sat down, his gaze focused and unwavering. "Let's get started. The sooner we lock this down, the better." Ivan didn't waste any time. He slid several documents across the desk. "This is the emergency protective order I've drafted. It will prevent Larissa from making any false claims of domestic violence against you, at least for the time being. We'll need to file this immediately." Dmitri nodded, flipping through the pages as Ivan continued. "We'll also start the process for custody. Based on what you told me, Larissa's actions will work against her. We'll document everything, her intentions, the recorded conversations, if you have them. Any slip-up she makes from this point on will strengthen your case." Dmitri signed the papers without hesitation. "I overheard her clearly. She was ready to accuse me of something horrific just to win in court. I'm not going to let her take my children or my business." Ivan leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Dmitri, we can play this smart. Larissa's banking on you reacting emotionally, but you've kept your cool. That's going to be our advantage. She thinks she's in control, but the moment she realizes she's been outmaneuvered, she'll panic. And when she panics, she'll make mistakes." Dmitri's eyes hardened. "She already made one mistake. She underestimated me." The rest of the meeting was spent in meticulous planning. Ivan outlined their legal strategy step by step, ensuring that Dmitri understood every detail. Dmitri listened carefully, absorbing the information, but his mind kept returning to one thought: his children. As the meeting concluded, Dmitri stood, shaking Ivan's hand firmly. "Thank you, Ivan. I'll keep everything in place on my end. Let me know the moment there's any movement from Larissa." Ivan nodded. "Stay strong, Dmitri. We're just getting started." Dmitri left the office feeling more in control than he had in days. His next move would be critical, but he was ready. Larissa's plan to destroy him had failed before it even started. Now it was his turn to fight back. As Dmitri left Ivan's office, he felt a cold sense of purpose settle over him. The legal gears were already in motion. But that was just the beginning. He had moved quickly, but he knew Larissa would soon realize something was wrong. She wasn't stupid. Dmitri knew that as soon as she tried to access their joint accounts, or even attempted to move ahead with her divorce plan, the walls would start closing in on her. He got into his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. A part of him wanted to speed back to the house to confront her, to see the shock in her eyes when she realized he had outsmarted her. But he knew that wasn't the right move. Not yet. He needed to keep his distance, stay ahead of her, and let her fall into the trap she had so carefully set for him. Driving through the familiar streets, Dmitri found his mind wandering back to his children, his two boys, both in their early teens. They were the reason he couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Larissa would surely use them as pawns, trying to paint herself as the victim and him as the villain. It made his blood boil to think of her twisting their perceptions, using them to further her own agenda. He parked his car near a quiet cafe, deciding to stop and think for a moment before heading back to his temporary hotel room. The cafe was nearly empty, the smell of fresh coffee lingering in the air as Dmitri found a corner table. He ordered a coffee and sat back, staring out of the window deep in thought. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sergei, his accountant. Dmitri opened it quickly, scanning the contents. "Dmitri, I've reviewed all the accounts. Everything is secure on our end. No unusual activity from Larissa yet, but she'll realize soon enough. Let me know if you need anything else." Dmitri breathed a little easier. For now, at least, his financials were locked down. Larissa couldn't touch his money, and without that, her plans would be significantly harder to execute. But it was only a matter of time before she reacted. He was just about to put his phone away when another message came through, this time from an unknown number. Dmitri frowned, hesitating before opening it. "Dmitri, it's Andrei. We need to talk." His blood ran cold. Andrei, the lover, the man who thought he could swoop in and steal Dmitri's life. The message made Dmitri's pulse quicken, but he forced himself to remain calm, reading the message again carefully. "Larissa doesn't know I'm reaching out, but I think we both know things are getting messy. We need to figure out a solution before this goes too far." Dmitri sat back. the anger rising in his chest like a tide. Andrei, this man who had been plotting behind his back, was now trying to play the reasonable card. Dmitri's jaw tightened as he typed out a response, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. "There's nothing to talk about, Andrei. You made your bed. Now lie in it." He hit send, his hands trembling slightly as the anger simmered beneath the surface. Andrei was getting nervous, and that was a good thing. It meant he was already feeling the pressure. Dmitri wondered if Larisa had any idea that her lover was trying to cut a deal behind her back. Dmitri took a deep breath, sipping his coffee as he tried to clear his mind. The message from Andrei had rattled him more than he wanted to admit, but it also confirmed something important. Andrei wasn't as confident in Larisa's plan as she was. He was already feeling the heat, and that meant Dmitri had the upper hand. As Dmitri finished his coffee, he began to formulate his next move. He couldn't afford to confront Andrei directly. It would play into Larisa's narrative, giving her the perfect excuse to claim that Dmitri was unstable, even violent. No, he had to remain calm, strategic. He had to let them unravel themselves. So with a final glance at his phone, Dmitri stood up, leaving the cafe behind. The battle was far from over, but he was ready for whatever came next. Dmitri's heart pounded as he walked out of the cafe. The message from Andrei echoed in his mind, fueling his cold anger. Andrei's nerves were cracking. He could sense it in the tone of the message. The man who had been so sure of himself, who had joined Larisa and plotting to destroy Dmitri, was now reaching out in desperation. Dmitri couldn't help but smirk at the irony. They had both thought they had everything under control, but now their carefully constructed plan was starting to unravel. The drive back to the hotel felt longer than usual. Dmitri's mind was racing, but he forced himself to remain focused. There was still so much to do, so much to prepare for. Larisa hadn't made her move yet, but it was only a matter of time before she tried something, perhaps filing the false domestic violence claim or making a play for custody of their children. The very thought of it made Dmitri's chest tighten, but he reminded himself that he was already ahead of her. He'd blocked her access to their finances, secured legal protection, and cut off her path to victory. Now he just had to stay patient and let Larisa dig her own grave. Once he arrived at the hotel, Dmitri sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. He thought about Andrei's message again. The man was trying to manipulate him, trying to strike some sort of deal. Dmitri wasn't sure what Andrei's angle was, but he wasn't about to play along. No, Dmitri had other plans. He wasn't going to negotiate or reason with a man who had conspired to destroy him. He decided not to respond to Andrei any further. Silence was a much more powerful weapon in this game. Andrei would be left wondering, waiting for a response that would never come. Let him sweat. Let him worry about what Dmitri was going to do next. Dmitri stood and began pacing the room, thinking about his next move. The legal groundwork was in place, but now he needed to turn his attention to his children. Larisa would undoubtedly try to poison them against him, perhaps by claiming he was unstable or dangerous. She was manipulative enough to do it, and Dmitri knew how easily children could be swayed, especially by a parent they trusted. He couldn't allow that to happen. Dmitri picked up his phone and called his younger brother, Maxim. They hadn't spoken in a while. Life had pulled them in different directions. But Maxim had always been a solid ally, someone Dmitri could trust completely. After a few rings, Maxim's familiar voice answered. "Dmitri, it's been a while. Everything all right?" Maxim's voice was filled with concern. "Not exactly," Dmitri replied, his voice steady but somber. "I need your help. It's about Larisa. Things are about to get very ugly." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Maxim spoke again, his tone serious now. "Tell me everything." And Dmitri explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out the most painful details but giving Maxim enough to understand the gravity of the situation. He told him about Larisa's affair, her plans to accuse him of domestic violence, and her intentions to take everything from him, including their children. "Jesus, Dmitri," Maxim breathed. "I knew she was bad news, but I didn't think she'd go this far." "Neither did I," Dmitri admitted. "But here we are. I need to make sure the kid don't get caught in the middle of this. She's going to try to turn them against me, Maxim. I can feel it. I need you to spend some time with them, talk to them. I need them to know that I'm still their father, no matter what she says." Of course, Maxim agreed without hesitation. "I'll be there for them. Just tell me what you need, and I'll do it." Dmitri felt a wave of relief wash over him. His brother was dependable, and with him in his corner, Dmitri felt like he could weather whatever storm Larisa tried to create. "Thank you, Maxim," Dmitri said quietly. "I won't forget this." "Family is family," Maxim replied. "We'll get through this together." After hanging up, Dmitri felt a renewed sense of purpose. The pieces were falling into place. With his brother watching over the kids and his lawyer handling the legal side of things, Dmitri was positioning himself for the final confrontation. Larissa thought she could manipulate everything, control everyone, but she was about to learn that Dmitri wasn't a man she could easily outplay. He had been careful, methodical, and now the real battle was about to begin. The next few days passed in a blur. Dmitri had been preparing for the storm, but now that it had finally arrived, it was fiercer than he had anticipated. Larissa had, as predicted, filed for divorce, accusing him of domestic violence in an attempt to win custody of the children and take the house. Dmitri had expected it, yet reading her lies on paper still left a bitter taste in his mouth. The sheer audacity of it, how easily she twisted the truth, painting herself as the victim and him as the villain. But Dmitri didn't let it rattle him. He even had prepared him for this moment, and they had already filed a counterclaim. His lawyer had been meticulous, documenting everything, even the false claims she made. The emergency protective order was in place, and thanks to Sergei's diligent work, Larissa's access to his finances remained completely cut off. She was left scrambling, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Then came the confrontation Dmitri had been waiting for. It wasn't in the courtroom, no, that was still ahead. It came at the house, when Larissa realized she was losing control. She had tried calling Dmitri's phone, leaving venomous messages demanding answers, but he hadn't responded. The silence was driving her mad, and finally one evening she showed up at his temporary apartment unannounced. Dmitri opened the door, his face expressionless, as Larissa stood there, her once calm and calculating demeanor now replaced by panic and anger. "What the hell have you done, Dmitri?" she spat, her eyes wide with desperation. "You cut me off. You're sabotaging everything." Dmitri remained calm, his voice cold as ice. "No, Larissa, you sabotaged yourself." She tried to argue, to throw the blame at his feet, but Dmitri didn't engage. He had no interest in her justifications, her lies, or her schemes. He simply stepped back, letting her rage fall flat against his resolve. "You thought you could break me, take everything I built, and use it for yourself. But you underestimated me, Larissa," Dmitri said, his voice steady. "Now you'll see what it feels like to lose." The shock in her eyes was palpable, but she quickly masked it with more anger. She was losing control, and they both knew it. She had never expected Dmitri to fight back this hard, to outmaneuver her at every turn. But the truth was, he had never been the fool she thought him to be. Without another word, Dmitri closed the door in her face, cutting off her final attempt to manipulate him. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the silence, feeling the weight of everything lifting off his shoulders. The battle wasn't over. There was still the divorce to settle, still the custody fight ahead. But Dmitri knew now that he had the upper hand. Larissa's plan had collapsed under its own weight, and Dmitri had emerged stronger, more resolute than ever. As he stood alone in the quiet of his apartment, Dmitri allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had taken his life back, and no matter what Larissa tried next, she would never break him.